I'd like to think I'm a smart woman. That for the most part, I'm alright. A bit unsatisfied in some areas, though. Having a man would be nice. Some children running around to stress me out and uplift the soul at the same time. But as it goes now, neither one of these exists in my life right now. I guess you could say I'm stuck in the paradigm of what is called reality, and not to mention the added pressures from a family that oddly seems to be spitting the same rhetoric. Be this by this age, have this by that age, achieve this in this amount of time. I tell you, I'm exhausted. I have no clue who or what I'm supposed to listen to these days. It all seems to lead me right back here. Utter confusion, stagnant, stuck. I know there's something bigger, something out there more I'm supposed to cling on to, grab onto, but I can't see it. Not far enough in the dark anyway. I find myself dreaming of nothing but the light, of brightness, and have no clue what this means. I'm confused. I promise I'm trying to get through the confusion, but it just doesn't seem to happen on my own. I need answers. I need guidance. I think being alone isn't everything, especially when you don't want to be, but what is it? What am I missing? I don't know.
So the idea of nation building, right, really helps us to understand that some of the assumed, we'll say, parallels that have been drawn between our current journey and the journeys of other people may not necessarily be accurate. When we're moving and we're striving towards a nation building kind of reality, we recognize that we may have unique origins, and those unique origins express themselves and build themselves into an identity that has certain parameters and certain imperatives that don't necessarily need to be substituted for things that are inferior. And we can determine what's inferior. Like when we look at the idea of, sometimes you hear like cultural appropriation, or we hear ideas talking around like borrowing or stealing, and of course, obviously, it's three different terms with the same outcome, but three different incentives, or intentions behind it. If you're cultural, if you're appropriating someone's culture, if you're borrowing someone's culture, and if you're stealing someone's culture, right? It just obviously the intent may be different, the motivating factors may be a little bit different, right? But if you think about it, when you're borrowing something, especially from a nation or from a culture, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but the presumption there is that you're borrowing from your equal, and you don't mind lending because you're lending to an equal. Just like if you're lending money to someone, or something, if you're lending it, you have the expectations that the person can return it. That's why you're lending it, right? They can give it back. So there's some level, obviously, of peer relationship there, or of equality, represented there. So sometimes it's important for us to look at, if we do consider our own culture or our own aspirations towards nationhood to be inferior to, superior to, or equal with, those that we are choosing to either, steal from, borrow from, or appropriate, right? So when you start to educate yourself in the way of employing the indoctrination, the necessary indoctrination of nation building, you start to become more in tune with some of your own subconscious subservience, to different groups that have actually been vanquished.
Culture defines how race, sex, religion, education, morality, psychology, and the world as a whole are perceived. Culture is a living, breathing organism that fights for survival and dominance within the psyche of an individual and community. If you do not choose a culture, one will be chosen for you. Solutions for dysfunctional family relationships. Healing and avoiding the aftermath of cross-cultural unions and the suicidal family. By Yuya T. Hassan Anu.
I will travel more miles than the Africans into Asia, and more miles than the Asian migration into America. More miles than 200 Mali ships sent back to Mexico before Christopher Columbus discovered what we already know. More miles than Marco Polo, more miles than Grandpa Volvo, more miles than Marty's Caddy, more miles than Double Jeep. I got more styles than the miles you commute every week, and more miles than the journeys of both Paul and Jesus combined. I travel more miles to reach you than the original Genesis Moses wrote in all his various translations from Hebrew. I travel more miles to get at you than the depths of an anvil. I hold you down through 1,000 leagues beneath the ground. I travel more miles than Richard Petty, Jeff Gerd, and Dale Earnhardt, just to prove to you what I do is hard to earn. I travel more miles than Che Guevara's motorcycle did. I travel more miles than Harriet Tubman. I will push through the snow in Russia, over mountains in China, swim through the Pacific Ocean, walk the hottest Sahara. I will go to the depths of hell and the gates of heaven, and come back from the afterlife just to complete my mission, spreading sunshine.
Spread a little sunshine. Let us spread a little sunshine. Come on and spread a little sunshine. Let us spread a little sunshine.
The sole provider, the sole controller of the fire, the same father that Jeremiah, most high Ayatollah. Blow the cloud out the sky, father of Noah, same soldier that never dies. You gotta try over, the sole provider, the same father of the Messiah, the most divine, to find the body, soul, and the mind. The sunshine, the one no one could ever become. The I and I, the most merciful. The eternal, the dark nights, the circle of life, the universal. Yo, I'm about to serve, you heard you was trying to match the height. I provide soul to the soul, spoken through this gold microphone that I hold, with no God but
I have never been one for self-help or how-to books. It's probably my issue now. But I couldn't help but grab this particular book after hearing the elders speak on culture and where it derives from. It says, defines race, morality, psychology, and the world as a whole are perceived. This is what stuck to me. How I feel and think are based off of the culture I subscribe to, but what is my culture and who's in it? Do it for the culture. We hear it chanted all the time. I'm guilty of proclaiming it, not even knowing what this culture consists of. Am I merely corralling myself in with the most dominant and melanated group? Do I even believe in or support the ideas of what this mashed together petri dish of a society has to offer me? I have never questioned it till now. This is probably why I'm confused, because I've subscribed to a culture that doesn't exist. Does it support me? Protect me? Provide parameters that prolong my bloodline? I don't know. But what I do know is this for the culture is trendy and expensive and empty, temporary. Interesting.
So we don't necessarily maybe operate with a culture of separation, but we tend to engage the world from a scientific and philosophical standpoint using inquiry that's culturally aligned to our spiritual ideas. That, well, everything that we're studying and everything that we're looking at is just an extension of something that's unseen, as we are the same byproducts of that extension, of that actuating, right? So the culture that we speak about, and again, just to kind of refresh, it's the totality of our values and our principles and our mores, and the ways that we do things that categorize ourselves as a people. So our behavioral patterns and our symbols and the values and our morality and the institutions that we create become our unique imprint on society that signifies what our culture is, right? And of course, so much of this is developed within the confines and the constructs of a home, of a family, right? So, a lot of times when you hear me speak, you hear me say, yeah, man, you gotta have a family. Where's your family? Where's your family? And of course, that's defined so many different ways. I'm not just saying, where's mommy, daddy, 2.5 children and a dog. I'm not necessarily speaking of that, but who's your people? When you're out here, who's your people? Sometimes I'm in the streets and I build with youth, right? And I look at some of these youth, man, and they're just out here. They're just out here, like they're raising themselves. And, I look at them and it's heart-wrenching, because you just look at them and say, man, who's with you? Who's your people? Or I speak to some of these young children sometimes, man, and they come from these real backwards-minded, selfish, self-absorbed, spiritually retarded and cultural crazy parents, right? And then you say, man, where's your father? I never met my father, which is a common thing. And of course, we always blame it on the father without saying, no, you're both. There's a problem with two of these people here. It's just because of the way society dictates. One parent may have the child, but it doesn't mean that's the better parent. Sometimes it's the worst parent, so we have to grow up beyond that perception. But sometimes you look at those children, it's such a sad thing. What are you connected to? Who are you connected to? And they're just out here. They're just, figuring it out on their own, and of course making a lot of mistakes, and they just grow up into adults who make a lot of mistakes and don't really have, again, that totality of values and that totality of actions that we look at and say, okay, this is who I am. These are my people. And, their ideology that they currently have has no rooting in history. It has no rooting in their ancestral movements, their ancestral legacy. So we see that nation building becomes a critical thing, not just so that we can have things, so that we can have stuff, so that we can have wealth, but nation building is a critical motivation for those who are looking for rootage.
So what to do now? Identify my culture and the laws and expectations of me and those within it, but if these requirements don't exist within it, I'm in trouble. It always seems like I'm starting over all the time. But is that a bad thing? Maybe there's a lesson I'm meant to learn. Like this one. Identify my culture. Interesting. Tune in next week for the next chapter of the Black Librarian Podcast, Journey of a Lost One. If you would like to hear the extended conversation from the excerpt you heard today, go to Enlightenment and Transformation YouTube channel and discover many topics for self-actualization. Don't forget to like, comment, and share the Black Librarian Podcast.